do not tell your loved one you're in a
That they're at
cult
a oh, okay.
because it's not going to get you anywhere. And in fact, they may try to prove you wrong by digging their heels into the group more.
Wow.
And so, I'm less concerned from my perspective about whether we label a group as cult or not cult. I'm more concerned about if someone has a cultic relationship with the
Hmm.
group in question. So, in other words, The Vow, for example, was a really popular documentary on Nixium and all the different workshops that people attended with Nixium. There was maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of people who attended a workshop, but they weren't harmed in the same ways that people higher up who were closer to Keith Raniere were.
Hmm.
Um, so it kind of goes to show there's different levels of like psychological and physical harm in these groups. Someone may have a pretty benign experience and say, well, this just isn't for me, and
Hmm.
like leave and just kind of move on. And then another person may be extremely harmed by harm done in the group. So, one person may have more of a cultic relationship to something than another.
As you have worked with people that have gone through this, are there certain, I don't know, personality traits or certain things that, might make one more susceptible to this kind of coercion or do you see like trends among the people who are uh, going through this?
Certainly. I think, in short answer, we are all susceptible. Not many people realize how close we are to cult involvement at any time. It's like sometimes 1 or 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
We may know a loved one who's involved in something that we're concerned about. Um, and I think, when it comes to why people join groups or how they're recruited more likely into groups is sometimes they're at really vulnerable places in their lives. Maybe they've just moved, maybe they're in their early 20s and they're like figuring out who they are and they want to try new things. Sometimes joining a cult can actually be life-saving initially. There were groups like Synanon, for example, back in the day that helped people who were addicts on the streets because there wasn't any social services for
Hmm.
them. And it wasn't until later that Synanon became a much more abusive cult like organization. And so, joining groups, no one willingly joins a destructive group. Um, and people oftentimes, of course, offer a very positive experience on the outset. And it's not until later that can get twisted on its head.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's like I think everybody wants to belong, right?
of
You
course.
want to have a
Yeah,
sense of belonging to something. And so I could see how that would be attractive.
yeah, of
Um,
course. And I wanted to circle back to your sort of question about definition.
mhm.
People assume that you have to be a religious group or have a charismatic cult leader in order to be considered a cult-like group or relationship, and that's simply not the case.
Hmm.
Most cultic groups do have a charismatic leader, but it's not uncommon that control can be exerted through maybe the ideology, the ideas, or maybe the people in the group or community itself can be sort of checking in on each other. Um, and so the way I sort of look at cultic groups in relationship is, it's a system of more than one.
Hmm.
Um, in other words, you can have two people where a relationship is cult-like with one another, like an abusive domestic violence relationship, for example, can be very cult-like. Um, More than one, it is a large amount of devotion to some person, some idea, something, whether that thing is religious or non-religious. And it must contain aspects of coercive control where they value more your dedication to the cause, even if it puts your own personal health, safety,
Hmm.
relationships at stake. Even if it's of your own self detriment, they prioritize the group or the idea or the person above individual health, freedom, safety, things like that.
Just a few minutes ago, you mentioned, if you are worried somebody's in a cult, you say, don't say a cult. Don't say
Yeah.
you're in a cult, right?
Yes.
What would you recommend? How would you recommend families, friends approach somebody then who is showing signs of, being in a coercive relationship of that sort?
That was one
Well,
of
like,
our social media questions, by the way. So
yeah,
That's
we did post some
awesome.
questions and somebody did ask that.
That's great.
Hmm.
That's the work that I do is I work with families and come up with strategies. In terms of like general advice, certainly my mentor Pat Ryan always says, if you're going to interfere with somebody's life, you better have a damn good reason. And sometimes families see someone in a group that maybe they're suspicious of, or maybe they don't have a lot of knowledge of. They just think maybe they do weird beliefs or practices, or it just seems off. That's not enough information necessarily to accuse someone of being involved in a thing. And so I think it's really important for families, and a lot of the work that I do is we have to find ways to bring down our own anxieties and focus on what we know and what we don't know. Where is our brain trying to fill in the gaps with this stuff?
Hmm.
Because it may truly be a situation that calls for greater concern or action or, but it also may be a situation where someone may be getting a lot out of it, but we don't have a lot of evidence that it's harmful. You know, we all have different beliefs in things that can be considered very strange, I'm sure. Some people have like their one conspiracy theory, for example, that they're like, I believe in this, right? We all have weird ideas about the way the world works. Where that can become harmful is when it goes up against how mental health is defined and positive and healthy views of mental health. So in other words, when that idea becomes so consuming that it takes over your ability to function healthily in society,
Hmm.
or maybe you are at risk for self-harm with yourself, or how you see yourself with your own community or family. So those are things to look out for. Those are the changes. In terms of advice, Ruth, it's a really good question. We don't know what we don't know when it comes to someone's involvement. And so what I encourage families is to be curious. We want to be curious about what someone's up to. What is
Yeah.
this thing? What is your experience? We don't want to be probative, we don't want to like put them on trial, but before we criticize what's going on, we need to know as much information as possible about your loved one's experience. What are they getting out of it? What is this group about? Are we noticing any changes that we need to be concerned of? Um, Curiosity oftentimes goes a long way. Judgment shuts down conversation
Hmm.
and certainly can drive someone into the arms of a cult even further if that's what's going on.